The year was 1874, and the Mississippi summer hung heavy and thick, like a wet wool blanket draped over the land. For a boy of 10 like me, Elijah Vance, it meant endless days of sweating through my thin cotton shirt, the air shimmering above, the dusty roads, and the constant droning hum of cicadas in the pecan trees. Our little farm, mostly cotton and corn, sat a few miles outside the town of Port Gibson, clinging to the edge of the Bayou Teche. Life was hard, a never-ending cycle of planting, tending, and harvesting, but it was honest, and Ma and Pa worked tirelessly. My older sister, Sarah, always had a mischievous glint in her eye and could outrun any boy in the county, even if she was supposed to be helping Ma churn butter. But even in the slow, predictable rhythm of farm life, there was always a shadow, and that shadow was the Carroll estate. It wasn't just a house, it was a legend, a looming specter on the horizon, built on a rise of land overlooking the winding river. The estate was vast, sprawling acres of what used to be a grand plantation, but after the war, much of it lay fallow, overgrown with kudzu and tangled vines that seemed to choke the very life out of the earth. The mansion itself was a monstrous thing of white columns and dark windows, like a blind, decaying giant watching over the land. Locals whispered stories about it, tales that made the hair on your arms stand up even on the hottest day. The Carroll family, they said, had been old money, deep Southern aristocracy. But their fortune, like many, had taken a tumble after the war. Still, they kept up appearances, or tried to. Mr. Thaddeus Carroll was a stern, unsmiling man, rarely seen without his dark suit, even in the blistering heat. His wife, Mrs. Clara Carroll, was a delicate, wilting flower of a woman, often seen being driven in a closed carriage, a lace fan fluttering at her throat. They had 2 children, a boy named Samuel, a year or 2 older than me, whom I'd only ever seen from afar, riding a pony that looked too grand for these post-war times, and a younger girl, Mary Beth, said to be a fragile thing, always ailing. No one from the town truly visited the Carrolls, not anymore. The estate was a world unto itself, guarded by a reputation for strangeness and the long, winding drive that disappeared into a tunnel of ancient oaks. My pa always told us to steer clear. No good comes from prying into other folks' business, especially the Carrolls, he'd say, his voice unusually low. They keep to themselves, and that's how it should be. But for a boy like me, those words were a challenge, not a warning. The mystery of the Carroll estate was a ripe fruit, forbidden and tempting. It was late August, the heat relentless, when the rumors began to trickle into Port Gibson. They started as whispers in the general store, then grew louder, carried by the breeze from the river. No one had seen anyone from the Carroll estate for days. Not Mr. Carroll, who usually rode into town for supplies. Not Mrs. Carroll in her closed carriage. Not even their overseer, a gruff, silent man named Jedediah, who sometimes came to collect their mail. At first, folks thought nothing of it. Perhaps they were away, visiting relatives in New Orleans, though it was unusual for them to leave without word. But then, a week turned into 2. The local postman, Mr. Abernathy, a different one from the boarding house, this Mr. Abernathy was a kindly, stooped man with a limp, grew concerned. He'd tried to deliver their mail, but the gates were locked, the house silent, and no one answered his persistent knocking. He reported it to Sheriff Brody, a man whose patience was as thin as his hair. Brody, a practical man, scoffed. Probably just hightailed it. Wouldn't be the first to cut and run after the war. But even Brody had a flicker of unease in his eyes. My pa heard the whispers, and I saw the grim set of his jaw. He was a man who believed in community, in looking out for your neighbors, even if they were the reclusive Carrolls. "Something ain't right, Ma," he muttered one evening, polishing his old hunting rifle, a ritual that always meant trouble was brewing. "Even a family like that doesn't just up and disappear." The next morning, Pa hitched up old Bess, our mule, to the wagon. "I'm heading out to the Carroll place," he announced, his voice firm. "Someone needs to check on them proper." My heart leapt. I wanted to go, to see the legendary estate up close, to be part of the unfolding mystery. "Can I come, Pa?" I pleaded, my voice barely a squeak. He looked at me, then at Ma, who nodded reluctantly. "Stay close, Elijah," she warned, "and mind your pa." The ride to the Carroll estate was longer than I remembered, the road growing narrower, and more overgrown the closer we got. The air was thick with humidity and the smell of damp earth. The ancient oaks that lined the final stretch of the drive seemed to lean in, their moss-draped branches like long, grasping fingers. When we finally reached the wrought iron gates, they were indeed locked, thick chains coiled around the ornate handles. Pa dismounted, his face grim. "No sign of forced entry," he muttered, examining the padlock. "And no tracks in the dust for days." He walked along the perimeter fence, looking for a way in. The fence was old, rickety in places, and finally he found a section where a few planks had rotted away. "Stay here, Elijah," he commanded, squeezing through the gap. "I'll go to the front door." But I was too curious. The moment Pa disappeared among the overgrown bushes, I slipped through the same gap. The air inside the estate felt different, cooler, heavier, as if the very trees held their breath. The silence was profound, broken only by the buzz of flies, and the distant caw of a crow. Weeds grew knee-high on the once manicured lawns, and the scent of decay, faint but unmistakable, hung in the air. I followed Pa's footsteps, keeping to the edge of the overgrown driveway, until the mansion itself came into full view. It was even grander and more unsettling than I had imagined. The white paint was peeling, revealing the dark wood beneath, like a disease. Windows, many of them shattered, stared out like empty eyes, reflecting nothing but the gray sky. A sense of desolation, deeper than mere abandonment, radiated from the place. I saw Pa standing on the wide, sprawling porch, knocking loudly on the massive front door. The sound echoed eerily in the oppressive silence. He tried the handle, then pounded, again calling out, "Mr. Carroll, Mrs. Carroll, anyone home?" No answer. The silence swallowed his words whole. As Pa turned to inspect a shattered window, I noticed something else, something small and glinting near the base of one of the massive white columns on the porch. I crept closer, my heart thumping against my ribs. It was a child's toy, a tiny, painted wooden horse half buried in the dust and leaves. It was exactly the kind of toy a boy like Samuel Carroll might have played with. Its presence here, amidst the silence and decay, felt profoundly wrong. Pa suddenly called out, his voice sharper now, "Elijah, get back to the wagon." I froze, startled, and quickly snatched up the wooden horse, tucking it into my pocket. I scurried back towards the gap in the fence, my mind racing. What had Pa seen? The toy horse was a cold, smooth weight in my hand, a silent witness. The Carrolls hadn't just high-tailed it. Something terrible had happened here. The kind of terrible that erased an entire family, leaving only shadows and forgotten toys behind. The 17-year mystery had just begun its slow, chilling reveal, and I, a curious boy, was suddenly caught in its cold embrace. The wooden horse in my pocket felt like a brand, burning against my leg as I scrambled back through the gap in the fence. My heart still thumped a frantic rhythm against my ribs, echoing Pa's sharp command to return to the wagon. I didn't know what he had seen, but his voice carried an urgency that cut through the summer air like a knife. He was already striding back towards the fence opening, his face a thundercloud. "Elijah! What in tarnation are you doing here?" He growled, his eyes narrowed, catching me just as I emerged. He saw the dust on my trousers, the slight trembling in my hands, and the guilt painted plainly on my face. "I told you to stay put." I just wanted to see, Pa," I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. I didn't dare mention the toy horse, not yet. He wouldn't understand, or worse, he'd be furious at my disobedience. Pa let out a frustrated sigh, running a hand over his tired face. This ain't a place for curiosity, boy. This is something else. He didn't elaborate, just grabbed my arm, not harshly, but with a grip that left no room for argument, and steered me back towards Old Bess and the wagon. The ride back to the farm was silent, the kind of silence that's louder than any shouting. Pa's usual easygoing nature was gone, replaced by a grim, distant look. I could feel his worry like a tangible thing, pressing down on the wagon. I knew he was thinking about what he'd seen inside the house, or rather what he hadn't seen. When we got back, Ma was waiting on the porch, her hands twisted in her apron. One look at Pa's face, and she knew. "What is it, Josiah?" she asked, her voice hushed. Pa removed his hat, running a hand through his sweat-damp hair. "They're gone, Martha. All of them. Not a soul in the house." He paused, his gaze drifting to the horizon, where the distant outline of the Carroll estate mansion was barely visible against the setting sun. "And it ain't just that they're gone. It's the way of it." He went on to describe the open doors, the undisturbed rooms, the uneaten meals on the dining table, dried and mummified by the heat, the beds unmade, as if someone had just risen from them. No signs of struggle, no overturned furniture, no broken glass. It was as if the family had simply stepped out for a moment and never returned. "The supper table, Martha," Pa said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Plates laid out, food still on them, like they just stood up mid-meal and walked away, and Samuel's books, laid open on his bed ready for reading. Ma gasped, bringing a hand to her mouth. "Lord have mercy. The children?" "No sign," Pa confirmed, his voice heavy. "Not a trace. Just emptiness. And that smell." He trailed off, shaking his head. I knew the smell he meant, the faint scent of decay that clung to the air around the estate. It wasn't the smell of a rotting carcass, but something subtler, more insidious, like something old and forgotten, slowly fading away. It was the scent of absence. The little wooden horse felt heavier than ever in my pocket. I still hadn't told them. I didn't know why, exactly. Perhaps a childish instinct to protect my secret, or perhaps a deeper fear that my small discovery wouldn't make a difference, or would only make things worse. News of Pa's findings spread through Port Gibson like wildfire. Sheriff Brody, initially dismissive, was forced to act. The next day, he assembled a small search party, Pa, Mr. Abernathy the postman, and a few other men from town, and they headed back to the Carroll estate. I watched them go, my chest tight with a mix of dread and longing. They returned late, that evening, exhausted and grim. They had searched the entire house, every room, every closet, every crevice. They had scoured the overgrown grounds, the derelict slave quarters, the disused barns. Nothing. No bodies, no signs of a struggle, no clues as to where the Carroll family had gone or what had become of them. It was as if they had simply ceased to exist, vanishing into thin air. Sheriff Brody, looking pale and perplexed, declared the estate abandoned. He put up a notice warning against trespassing and claimed that the Carrolls had likely fled their debts, a common enough occurrence after the war. But the town didn't believe him. The whispers grew louder, more ominous. People started calling it the ghost house, a place where the air itself was tainted with the unexplained. Over the next few weeks, the Carroll estate became a local legend, a chilling tale told around supper tables and whispered in schoolyards. Folks avoided the road that led to it, taking long detours. Farmers swore their livestock grew skittish near its borders. Even the birds seemed to avoid the ancient oaks that shaded its drive. But for me, it wasn't just a legend. I had seen. The empty house, felt the oppressive silence, smelled the faint decay. And I had the wooden horse. Every night I would take it out from under my mattress, tracing its smooth, worn contours with my finger. It was proof. Proof that a little boy named Samuel Carroll had existed, had played, and had then simply vanished. My curiosity, once a childish adventure, now felt like a heavy burden. I couldn't forget the sight of that empty supper table, the open books. It haunted me. I started visiting the estate myself secretly whenever I could slip away from my chores. I didn't go inside, not after Pa's warning, but I would stand at the edge of the fence, looking up at the silent, decaying mansion, trying to piece together the puzzle. I would trace the paths of the overgrown weeds, imagining where Samuel or Mary Beth might have played. I'd pick up fallen leaves, imagining them under their feet. The house remained an enigma, a monument to a mystery. It was a place where life had once been, and then, in a single night, it had been completely, utterly erased. The longer I watched, the more I felt a strange connection to the place, to the vanished family. It was as if their absence had left a hollow space, and I, the curious boy, was drawn to fill it with my observations. I wondered what had truly happened that night. Had they been taken? Had they fled into the night, leaving everything behind? Or was it something else, something even more profound and terrifying, that had caused an entire family to be erased without a trace? The mystery of the Carroll estate hung in the humid Mississippi air, a suffocating presence. And I, Elijah Vance, was slowly, quietly becoming its keeper. I knew I wouldn't rest until I understood what happened that fateful night, 17 years ago, when the Carroll family simply ceased to be. And I had a feeling that the wooden horse, clutched tightly in my small hand, was just the first thread in a very tangled, very dark knot. The summer ripened, then slowly began to surrender to the first cool hints of autumn. But the oppressive weight of the Carroll estate's mystery never lifted. It clung to the humid Mississippi air, as pervasive as the mosquitoes that hummed in. The twilight. The wooden horse, Samuel's horse, became my constant companion, a silent confidant hidden beneath my mattress by night and clutched in my pocket during my secret expeditions to the edge of the estate. Each time I touched its worn surface, I felt a fresh surge of resolve, a quiet promise to the vanished boy whose toy it had once been. My secret visits became more frequent. I would finish my chores, sometimes even before Pa asked, then slip away, telling Ma I was going fishing or exploring the bayou. But my true destination was always the same, the forbidden grounds of the Carroll estate. I never dared to go inside the mansion again, not after Pa's grim return and the sheriff's ominous "Notice." But I walked the perimeter, tracing the crumbling stone walls, observing the changes, however subtle, in the overgrown landscape. The air around the estate always felt different, cooler, even on the hottest days, and the silence was profound, broken only by the rustling of leaves or the distant cries of wild birds. It was the kind of silence that made your ears strain for sounds that weren't there, the kind that filled your mind with unsettling whispers. I looked for signs, anything, that could tell me what had happened. Overturned earth? A discarded item? But the search party had been thorough, and the passage of weeks had allowed nature to reclaim what little evidence might have remained. One afternoon, I decided to venture further into the overgrown woods that bordered the Carroll property, a dense thicket of trees and thorny bushes that folks usually avoided, even the hunters. I reasoned that if the family had fled, they might have gone through these woods to avoid the main road, or if something more sinister had happened, perhaps a clue had been overlooked in the wild, untamed wilderness. The sun dappled through the canopy, casting shifting patterns on the forest floor, and the air here was even heavier, thicker, with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. I walked slowly, pushing aside tangled vines, my eyes scanning the ground. I imagined Samuel and Mary Beth, perhaps frightened, perhaps hurrying, leaving something behind in their haste. I thought of their parents, stern Mr. Carroll and fragile Mrs. Carroll. What desperation must have driven them. But there was nothing, only the endless green and brown of the forest. My boots crunched on dry leaves and twigs, each sound magnified, in the profound silence. After what felt like hours, though it was likely less, I stumbled upon something unusual. It wasn't a clue from the family, but something that caught my eye nonetheless. Hidden deep within a particularly dense clump of blackberry bushes, where the thorns tore at my clothes, was a small, crudely built lean-to. It was barely big enough. For one person, made of old branches and tattered canvas, cleverly concealed from casual view. Someone had been living here, or at least using it as a temporary shelter. My heart quickened. This was new. No one had mentioned a vagrant living near the estate. I approached cautiously, pushing aside the thorny branches. Inside it was dark and cramped. The air was stale, smelling faintly of wood smoke and something else. Something sharp and acrid, like old tobacco. There was a blackened patch on the ground where a small fire had been built, and next to it, a discarded empty tin of beans. Then I saw it. Tucked beneath a loose stone, almost as if hidden, was a small, leather-bound journal. It was old, its cover scuffed and worn, and it had no title, no identifying marks. My hands trembled as I picked it up. It felt forbidden, like touching a secret. The pages were yellowed with age, filled with cramped, spidery handwriting that was difficult to decipher in the dim light. I didn't dare read it there. The thought of someone returning, of being caught, was a cold splash of fear. I tucked the journal deep inside my shirt, feeling its hard edges press against my ribs. I made sure to leave the lean-to as I found it, pushing the branches back into place, attempting to erase my presence. I practically ran back through the woods, scrambling over roots and pushing through undergrowth until I burst out onto the main road, breathless and exhilarated. The sun was beginning to dip below the tree line, painting the sky in fiery oranges and purples. I still had chores to do, and I needed to get back before Ma and Pa started asking questions. That night, after everyone else was asleep, and the only sound was the chirp of crickets outside my window, I pulled the leather journal from its hiding place. By the faint light of a stolen candle, I opened it, my heart pounding with anticipation. The handwriting was indeed difficult, full of strange abbreviations and faded ink. But as I squinted, painstakingly deciphering the words, a name jumped out at me. Jedediah. Jedediah. That was the name of the Carroll's overseer, the gruff, silent man who had also vanished with the family. My eyes widened. This journal belonged to him. My fingers traced the faded letters. The first few entries were mundane, detailing farm, work, crop yields, the usual drudgery of plantation life. But then the tone shifted. The entries grew darker, more agitated. Jedediah wrote about strange occurrences at the estate, faint noises in the night, peculiar shadows, an unsettling chill, even in the height of summer. He wrote of Mr. Carroll becoming increasingly withdrawn, obsessed with something hidden beneath the mansion. He speaks of a discovery, Jedediah had written, his words barely legible, a hidden passage, something ancient. My breath hitched. A hidden passage. Could that be it? Could that explain how an entire family vanished without a trace? The entries became more frantic. Jedediah spoke of hearing voices, faint and echoing, coming from deep within the house. He wrote of feeling watched, of sensing a presence that filled him with dread. He detailed Mrs. Carroll's increasing frailty, her fits of melancholia, and the children, Samuel and Mary Beth, growing pale and quiet, their laughter replaced by hushed whispers. Then came the entry that made my blood run cold, dated just days. Before the family's disappearance, the master has opened it. Madness, the sound. It is unbearable. They insist it is a blessing, a gift from the earth, but I feel only cold. We are lost. This place, it consumes. God forgive us. The next few pages were blank, then a final desperate scrawl, barely legible. The light. It calls. The passage. We descend. No escape. The family. Erased. And then nothing. The journal ended abruptly, a chilling silence on its last page. I blew out the candle, plunging my small room into darkness, but the words Jedediah had written burned in my mind. A hidden passage, a sound, a light that called, and a family consumed, erased. It wasn't just abandonment or flight or even a simple murder. This was something far more terrifying, something that preyed on the very air, on the very light. The faint decay, the profound silence, the chilling emptiness of the Carroll estate suddenly made a horrific kind of sense. The mystery wasn't 17 years old. It had been waiting for me to discover it. Jedediah's journal was a torch in the deep darkness of the Carroll mystery. The words hidden passage, sound, it is unbearable, and light, it calls, echoed in my mind, far more chilling than any ghost story I'd ever heard. It wasn't just a family disappearing. It was something ancient, something consuming, something connected to the very ground the mansion stood upon. The faint decay, the profound silence that clung to the estate suddenly made a horrific kind of sense. This wasn't a crime of human hands, not entirely. This was something else. Sleep, already a rare commodity since my discoveries, became impossible. I spent the nights rereading Jedediah's journal, squinting in the faint moonlight that filtered through my window, trying to tease out every nuance of his frantic scrawl. He spoke of Mr. Carroll's obsession, of him spending hours in the dusty, forgotten library, poring over old maps and texts, searching for something his ancestors had hidden. A gift from the earth, they had called it. But Jedediah, even in his fear, knew it was a curse. My mind raced. A hidden passage meant a way into whatever had consumed the Carrolls. But where was it? The journal hinted at a sound and a light, suggesting it wasn't just a physical opening, but something that lured. It felt like a deep, dark well, pulling them in. I knew then, with a terrifying certainty, that I had to find that passage. I couldn't just tell Pa or Sheriff Brody. They wouldn't understand. They'd think Jedediah was mad, or that I was imagining things. I had to see it for myself. The next day, I feigned a headache again to avoid chores, earning a worried glance from Ma, but giving me the precious time I needed. Armed with Jedediah's journal tucked securely in my shirt and Samuel's wooden horse in my pocket, I set out for the Carroll estate. The air was crisp now, hinting at true autumn, but the dread in my stomach was hotter than any summer day. I entered through the broken fence, the silence of the estate greeting me like an old cold friend. I walked directly to the mansion, my eyes scanning its imposing facade. Jedediah had mentioned the library. That seemed like the most logical place to start. If Mr. Carroll had been studying old texts and maps there, perhaps the entrance to the passage was hidden within that room. The front door, which Pa had tried, was still stubbornly shut. I moved to the shattered window that Pa had examined, the one that led into the main parlor. It was still broken, the glass shards glinting wickedly in the morning sun. With a deep breath, I climbed through, my boots crunching on the glittering fragments. The interior of the mansion was even more desolate than I remembered. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light that pierced the gloom, illuminating forgotten furniture draped in white sheets like ghosts. The air was thick with the scent of decay, stronger here, a musty, sweet smell that made my nose prickle. I moved through the silent house, my footsteps echoing unnervingly. The dining table, just as Pa had described, stood frozen in time. The dried remnants of a meal on tarnished silver plates. It was a chilling tableau of a life suddenly, violently interrupted. I found the library easily enough. It was a grand room lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, many now empty, others still, packed with leather-bound volumes covered in a thick layer of dust. A large, ornate desk stood in the center, littered with inkwells, quills, and scattered papers, all preserved as if time itself had stopped mid-sentence. I began my search, my heart thumping a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I pulled books from shelves tapped on walls, ran my hands along the carved wood panels. I looked for anything unusual, a hidden lever, a loose brick, a seam in the wallpaper. Jedediah's journal was vague, offering no specific location beyond beneath the mansion. Hours passed, the sun shifted, and the library grew dim. Despair began to creep in. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe there was no passage. Maybe Jedediah had simply gone mad. Just as I was about to give up, my fingers brushed against something unusual behind a particularly heavy, dusty tome on a lower shelf. It wasn't wood. It was cold, smooth metal. I pulled the book out. Behind it, almost perfectly camouflaged, was a small brass handle, set flush into the back of the bookshelf. It was old, tarnished, and barely visible. Hope surged through me, a dizzying rush. This was it. I grasped the handle, my fingers trembling. It was stiff, resistant, as if it hadn't been moved in decades. I pulled harder, gritting my teeth, straining every muscle in my small body. With a groan of old wood and rusted hinges, a section of the bookshelf slowly, agonizingly swung inwards, revealing a narrow, dark opening. A blast of cold, stale air rushed out, carrying with it that cloying, sickeningly sweet scent, now overwhelmingly strong. And with it, a faint, almost imperceptible hum. It wasn't a buzzing or a drone, but a low, resonant vibration that seemed to penetrate my bones, making the hair on my arms stand on end. This was the sound Jedediah had written about. I peered into the darkness. It was a spiral staircase, carved from rough stone, descending into what looked like an endless black pit. No natural light reached down there. But at the very bottom, impossibly far below, I could see it. A faint, pulsating light. Not a lamp, not a torch. It was an ethereal blue-white glow, throbbing with an otherworldly energy. This was the light that calls. Fear, cold and paralyzing, washed over me. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to turn and run, to close the passage and never look back. But the images of the Carroll family, of Samuel and his toy horse, flashed in my mind. They had gone down there, and I had to know why. I had to understand. I took a deep, shaky breath, pushing down the terror. My hand tightened on the wooden horse in my pocket, drawing strength from its small, solid presence. I couldn't go back now. I had found the path, and I had to follow it. With one last glance back at the dust-shrouded library, at the silent, empty house above, I gripped the rough stone railing, and slowly, cautiously, I began my descent into the profound darkness of the hidden passage, towards the pulsating, unnatural light below. The descent was a slow, agonizing crawl into a profound, suffocating darkness. Each stone step of the spiral staircase was cold and slick with dampness, my hand gripping the rough railing like a lifeline. The air grew heavier with every turn, thick with that cloying, sickly sweet scent, and the low, resonating hum that vibrated through my very bones. It was a sound that seemed to reach inside my head, a pressure behind my eyes making me feel dizzy and disoriented. It wasn't loud, not like a shout, but insidious, like a whisper that grew louder the deeper it burrowed into your mind. The blue-white light at the bottom pulsed rhythmically, a beacon in the inky blackness, drawing me down despite the primal scream of every instinct to turn back. It wasn't a comforting light. It was cold and sterile, like moonlight on a tombstone. As I descended, the shadows danced around me, twisting into grotesque shapes that seemed to lunge and recede. My breath hitched in my throat, each intake of the thick, damp air tasting of dust and that unsettling metallic sweetness. I lost all sense of time. The stairs seemed endless, spiraling deeper and deeper beneath the earth. My legs ached, my head throbbed, and the wooden horse in my pocket felt less like a comfort and more like a magnet, pulling me relentlessly towards that unnatural glow. I thought of Samuel, perhaps clutching his own toy horse, descending these very steps, drawn by the same hypnotic hum, the same eerie light. What must he have felt? Fear? Confusion? Or had the light, the sound, already begun to change him, to dull his senses, to lure him beyond resistance? Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the staircase ended. I stepped onto a flat, uneven stone floor. The light, though still distant, was brighter here, illuminating a vast, cavernous space. It wasn't a natural cave. The walls were roughly hewn, but there were signs of human intervention. Crude carvings on some of the larger stones, barely discernible in the strange glow, like ancient symbols or forgotten warnings. The air was still and cold, and the hum was louder, a deep, continuous thrum that filled the entire space. I looked around, my eyes straining to make sense of the gloom. The cavern stretched out before me, immense and silent, like the belly of the earth. And then I saw it. In the center of the cavern, emanating the blue-white light, was a structure. It wasn't a lamp or a fire. It was a massive, crystalline formation, jagged and irregular, piercing the cavern floor like an alien growth. It pulsed with an internal light, a living, breathing luminescence that seemed to draw all other light into itself. The hum was strongest, here, vibrating from the crystal, a silent song that seeped into my very core. Around the crystal, arranged in a rough circle, were several figures. Not people, not anymore. They were husks, like empty shells. I stumbled back, a choked gasp escaping my lips. They were indistinct in the strange light, but I could make out their shapes. A stern, tall figure, a smaller, delicate one, and two even smaller ones, barely visible. Mr. and Mrs. Carroll, Samuel and Mary Beth. Their clothes, what remained of them, hung loosely on skeletal frames. Their faces were turned towards the crystal, their eye sockets empty, their mouths agape as if caught mid-scream or mid-whisper. They were desiccated, dried out, like leaves that had been drained of all moisture, all life. The same sickeningly sweet smell, now overwhelming, was strongest here. The scent of decay that was somehow also the scent of utter dryness, of life leached away. I clapped my hands over my mouth, suppressing a sob. This was what Jedediah meant by consumed, by erased. They hadn't fled. They hadn't been murdered in the conventional sense. They had been absorbed, drained by this thing, the crystal. It was a parasitic growth, feeding on life, on essence, and the hum, the light. They weren't just luring. They were drawing, pulling the very life out of them. My eyes, wide with horror, darted to the side. Near one of the husks, a smaller one that must have been Samuel, lay a scatter of items, a few loose buttons, a fragment of cloth, and a tarnished, broken locket with a faint E etched into it. Miss Eleanor Finch, from the Widow Blackwoods. And then I understood. It wasn't just the Carrolls, it was all of them. All the vanished guests from the boarding house, all the missing souls who had left no trace. Mrs. Blackwood wasn't the killer. She was the shepherd. Jedediah's journal spoke of Mr. Carroll's obsession, of a gift from the earth. He must have discovered this thing, this crystal perhaps in some forgotten chamber beneath the house. And in his desperation, in his greed for some ancient power, he had tried to harness it, to use it. But it wasn't a gift. It was a devourer. He had likely brought his family down here, believing it would grant them something, cure Mary Beth's illness, perhaps, or restore their fortune, only for them to become its victims. And Jedediah, the loyal overseer, likely followed them, either out of duty or out of a desperate, perhaps insane hope. And Mrs. Blackwood? The widow's boarding house. It clicked into place with a chilling finality. She wasn't a murderer. She was a provider. She found vulnerable souls, lost in the vastness of New York, desperate for a place to stay, and she led them, perhaps, unknowingly at first, perhaps with a growing, chilling understanding, to the gift from the earth. She was the bait, the hum, the light, the very essence of the crystal. Must have extended, a subtle, invisible siren call, drawing those sensitive enough to it, those open to its pull, from the surrounding area. Mrs. Blackwood was simply opening the door. My own head began to ache, a dull, insistent pressure behind my eyes. The hum of the crystal seemed to grow louder, or perhaps it was just my mind, finally recognizing its hypnotic pull. The blue-white light pulsed, seeming to beckon me, promising something undefinable, something that transcended earthly concerns. A strange, serene calm began to settle over me, dulling the edges of my fear. It was a tempting feeling, a release from the terror, a promise of peace. I felt myself swaying, drawn forward just a step towards the glowing crystal. My hand, still clutching Samuel's wooden horse, felt heavy, leaden. The husks of the Carroll family stood silent, their empty gazes fixed on the light, as if in eternal worship. Was this what they had felt? This serene, terrifying compulsion? With a sudden, desperate surge of will, I remembered Ma, her tired, worried face, her call for me to be a good boy. The memory was a cold splash of reality, a jolt that cut through the crystal's hypnotic hum. This was not peace. This was oblivion. This was erasure. I was not one of the Carrolls. I had a home. I had a Ma. I would not be consumed. I turned, my back on the horrifying tableau, on the pulsating crystal and the silent husks. My legs, heavy with exhaustion and fear, began to move. I had to get out. I had to escape this place, this ancient consuming horror beneath the earth. The ascent up the spiral staircase would be even harder than the descent. But now, instead of the terrifying unknown, I carried a terrifying truth. I had found the answer to the 17-year mystery, and it was far more monstrous than any human villain could be.